Some men are born evil, others have it thrust upon them. But Ken Rex McElroy, he embraced it. He became the very embodiment of it, a boogeyman in blue jeans and a cowboy hat. This is the story of the day the devil came to Skidmore, Missouri, and the day he met his end. The small town of Skidmore, Missouri, became McElroy's personal fiefdom. He ruled through fear and intimidation, his mere presence enough to silence even the bravest of souls. He preyed on the local businesses, extorting money with threats of violence. He harassed families, vandalized property, and turned their peaceful community into a living nightmare. Stories of McElroy's brutality are the stuff of legend. He once shot a man for refusing to sell him beer. Another time, he burned down a farmer's barn for daring to speak out against him. He was a monstrous paradox, a man who instilled fear in grown men, yet who seemed untouchable, protected by some unseen force. The people of Skidmore lived in constant fear. They were trapped, their lives held hostage by a man who seemed to operate with impunity. The police were either unwilling or unable to help them. They felt abandoned, forgotten, left to fend for themselves against a force they could not hope to defeat. But fear, as they say, is a powerful motivator. It can cripple, but it can also galvanize. And in the heart of Skidmore, a quiet defiance began to stir. The townspeople, pushed to their limit, began to whisper amongst themselves. They had endured McElroy's reign of terror for far too long. It was time to take back their town. Their anger, however, was tempered by a chilling reality. McElroy was cunning. He surrounded himself with a loyal band of followers, men and women as twisted and ruthless as their leader. Any attempt to bring him down through legal means had been met with threats, intimidation, and violence. The situation in Skidmore had reached a boiling point. The town was a powder keg, and it was only a matter of time before something or someone lit the fuse. And on a sweltering July day in 1981, that fuse was lit. Ken Rex McElroy's descent into darkness wasn't sudden, but a slow, insidious creep. His early crimes were petty thefts from unlocked cars, vandalism. The townsfolk dismissed him as a bad seed. They would soon learn the true depths of his depravity. His crimes escalated, fueled by arrogance and impunity. He graduated to stealing livestock and farm equipment. His victims were left financially crippled. McElroy took perverse pleasure in their misfortune. His reign of terror wasn't limited to property crimes. He used his fists and reputation to intimidate and control. He preyed on the weak, reveling in their fear. Men, women, even children were not immune to his cruelty. Word of McElroy's exploits spread like wildfire. He became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. He was the embodiment of lawlessness, a cancer in their community. McElroy's reign of terror extended beyond mere theft and violence. He delighted in psychological warfare, keeping the town on edge. Often he sat on his porch with a shotgun, staring down passers-by. His tactics were varied and cruel. One day he might release Rottweilers to terrorize children. The next he might fire his shotgun at night, shattering the peace. His reign was hard on local businesses. He threatened store owners, taking merchandise without paying. Those who resisted faced brutal retribution. Despite his reign of terror, McElroy did occasionally find himself on the wrong side of the law. He was arrested numerous times, charged with a litany of crimes ranging from assault to arson to grand theft auto. But each time, he seemed to slip through the cracks of the justice system. Witnesses, terrified of McElroy's retribution, would change their stories or refuse to testify. Evidence would mysteriously disappear. Juries, intimidated by McElroy's menacing presence in the courtroom, would often acquit him even in the face of overwhelming evidence. His ability to evade justice only emboldened him, fueling his sense of invincibility. He became a folk hero to some, a symbol of defiance against authority. But to most, he was a dangerous predator, a cancer on their community that the law seemed powerless to excise. By the summer of 1981, a palpable tension had settled over Skidmore. The fear that had once been a constant companion had now transformed into something else. It was a simmering rage, a desperate yearning for justice, for someone or something to break the stranglehold McElroy had on their lives. The townspeople, pushed to their limit, began to hold secret meetings, whispering in hushed tones about what could be done. They knew that the law had failed them, that they were on their own. A sense of grim determination settled over the town, a silent pact forged in the face of fear. McElroy, oblivious to the growing resentment, continued his reign of terror. He had become a creature of habit, his arrogance blinding him to the danger brewing beneath the surface. He mistook their silence for acquiescence, their fear for respect. He would soon learn the terrible price of his miscalculation. The powder keg that was Skidmore finally exploded on a sweltering July morning. Ken Rex McElroy, true to form, had struck again. This time his victim was 70-year-old Ernest Bowen, the owner of the local grocery store. A minor disagreement over the price of a can of beans escalated into a violent confrontation. McElroy, witnesses said, had pistol-whipped the elderly man, leaving him bloodied and unconscious on the floor of his own shop. News of the attack spread through Skidmore like wildfire. This time, it was different. This time, the fear was tinged with something else, something darker, something that looked a lot like rage. The townspeople, pushed to their absolute limit, had finally had enough. The whispers turned to shouts, the fear into a quiet, steely resolve. The attack on Ernest Bowen was a bridge too far. He was a pillar of the community, a kind and gentle soul who wouldn't hurt a fly. If McElroy could do this to him, he could do it to anyone. A sense of dread settled over the town, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. That evening, the townspeople gathered in the Skidmore Town Hall. It was a scene straight out of a movie. The air thick with tension, the mood somber. Farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, housewives, they came from all walks of life, united by a common enemy. For the first time in years, they spoke openly about McElroy, their fear replaced by a quiet determination. They recounted their own experiences with the town bully, their voices trembling with suppressed rage. Stories of intimidation, of threats, of violence, a litany of grievances spilled out into the open. The meeting went on for hours, the air growing hotter with each tale of injustice. Finally, a consensus began to emerge. They couldn't rely on the law to protect them. They had to take matters into their own hands. It was a dangerous path, one that could have dire consequences, but they were out of options. They had to do something, anything, to break McElroy's hold on their town. The decision was made. A delegation of townspeople, led by the sheriff, would confront McElroy. They would deliver an ultimatum: leave Skidmore or face the consequences. It was a risky move, but they were desperate. The delegation found McElroy at the D&G Tavern. He was surrounded by his cronies. The sheriff stepped forward. "McElroy," he said, "we've had enough. You got 24 hours to pack your bags and get out." McElroy laughed, eyes glinting with malice. "You and whose army?" he sneered. Section 4, Ticking Time Bomb. The delegation left the bar, their mission a failure. McElroy wasn't going anywhere. If anything, the confrontation had only emboldened him. He knew they were afraid. He knew they wouldn't do anything. He had been right before, and he was sure he was right now. But something had shifted in Skidmore that day. The fear that had held the town captive for so long had finally broken. In its place was a steely resolve, a quiet determination that sent shivers down the spines of those who had underestimated the people of this small town. The ultimatum had been delivered. The clock was ticking. And in Skidmore, Missouri, the air was thick with the smell of fear and the promise of retribution. Section 1, high noon, July 10th, 1981. The sun beat down on Skidmore, Missouri, the air thick with humidity and anticipation. The town held its breath, nerves on edge. Ken Rex McElroy, unfazed, held court at the D&G Tavern. He laughed off the ultimatum, calling the townspeople cowards. Meanwhile, across town, a different kind of gathering was taking place. As noon approached, the tension in Skidmore ratcheted up another notch. Section 2. The shots ring out. Shortly after noon, Ken Rex McElroy emerged from the D&G Tavern. He was accompanied by his wife, Trina, who had been inside with him. They climbed into his pickup truck, a beat-up Chevy with a gun rack in the back window. It was then, just as McElroy started the engine, that it happened. A sudden volley of gunshots shattered the midday quiet. Witnesses would later describe a scene of chaos and confusion, with shots coming from multiple directions. People scattered for cover, diving behind cars, ducking into doorways, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. When the smoke cleared, a chilling sight met the eyes of those who dared to look. Ken Rex McElroy slumped over the steering wheel of his truck, his body riddled with bullets. His reign of terror was over. Word of the shooting spread through Skidmore like wildfire. People poured out onto the streets, drawn to the scene of the crime by a mixture of curiosity and morbid fascination. The air buzzed with a strange energy, a mix of shock, disbelief, and a palpable sense of relief. The police arrived quickly, sirens wailing, but they were met with a wall of silence. Despite the fact that dozens of people had witnessed the shooting, no one claimed to have seen anything. No one could or would identify the shooter. Ken Rex McElroy, the man who had terrorized Skidmore for decades, had been gunned down in broad daylight, and yet it seemed he had died at the hands of a ghost. The investigation was further hampered by the fact that many of the witnesses were themselves implicated in the shooting. It was an open secret that a group of townspeople had been plotting against McElroy, but proving it was another matter entirely. The question on everyone's mind, whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors, was simple. Was this justice, or was it vengeance? Had the people of Skidmore finally taken the law into their own hands, delivering the punishment they felt McElroy so richly deserved? The debate raged in the days and weeks following the shooting. Some argued that McElroy's death, while tragic, was the inevitable outcome of his own actions. He had sown the wind, and now he was reaping the whirlwind. Others, however, condemned the killing as a perversion of justice, a sign that Skidmore had descended into lawlessness. The grand jury convened, but no indictments were ever handed down. The people of Skidmore had closed ranks, protecting their own. The official investigation into the death of Ken Rex McElroy had hit a dead end, but the questions lingered. Despite the lack of cooperation from the townspeople, the investigators were determined to uncover the truth. They knew that someone in Skidmore held the key to unlocking the secrets of that fateful July day. They began by painstakingly piecing together the events leading up to the shooting, interviewing and re-interviewing witnesses, hoping to catch someone in a lie, a discrepancy, anything that could lead them to the shooter. They scrutinized every detail, every whisper, every rumor. They examined the ballistics reports, searching for clues in the trajectory of the bullets. They pored over McElroy's past, looking for any enemies he might have made outside of Skidmore, anyone who might have had a motive for wanting him dead. Their investigation took them down a rabbit hole of small-town secrets, uncovering a web of lies, betrayals, and long-held grudges. Everyone in Skidmore seemed to have a story, a theory, a suspicion. But the truth, like the identity of the shooter, remained elusive, hidden behind a wall of silence that seemed impenetrable. The death of Ken Rex McElroy had a profound and unsettling effect on Skidmore. The once unified front of fear, the shared experience of living under the thumb of a tyrant, had fractured. In its place, a chasm of suspicion and mistrust had opened up, dividing the community. Those who had openly condemned the killing found themselves ostracized, labeled as sympathizers or worse. Their neighbors, once friendly and familiar, now crossed the street to avoid them, their gazes cold and suspicious. The social fabric of the town, already frayed by years of McElroy's reign, began to unravel. The silence that had blanketed Skidmore in the immediate aftermath of the shooting became an oppressive presence. People spoke in hushed tones, afraid to voice their thoughts and feelings lest they be judged or worse, implicated. The fear that had haunted them during McElroy's time had been replaced by a new kind of fear, the fear of each other. In the absence of answers, whispers and rumors filled the void. Theories about the shooting abounded, passed from person to person, each retelling adding a new layer of intrigue and speculation. Some whispered that McElroy's own gang had turned on him, tired of his unpredictable cruelty. Others claimed it was an outsider, a hired gun brought in to exact revenge for some past transgression. Every conversation, every encounter was laced with suspicion. People looked at each other differently, seeing potential conspirators, informants, or avengers in the faces of those they had known their entire lives. The line between truth and fiction blurred, fueled by fear and mistrust. The local newspaper, starved for information, printed every rumor and theory they could find, further fanning the flames of speculation. The national media descended on Skidmore, eager to capitalize on the story of the town that had taken the law into its own hands. But despite the intense scrutiny, the truth remained elusive, buried beneath layers of speculation and conjecture. The children of Skidmore were not immune to the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over their town. They overheard snippets of conversations, caught glimpses of their parents' worried faces, sensed the undercurrent of fear and suspicion that permeated their once peaceful community. The playground, once a place of laughter and carefree play, became strangely silent. Games of tag and hide and seek were replaced by whispered conversations and furtive glances. The innocence of childhood had been tainted by the knowledge that even in a small town like Skidmore, darkness could lurk around every corner. The adults, struggling to come to terms with the events themselves, found it difficult to explain the unexplainable to their children. How do you explain that sometimes the people you trust, the people who are supposed to protect you, can also be capable of terrible things? The years passed, and the initial shock of Ken Rex McElroy's death eventually faded. Life in Skidmore went on, but the events of that sweltering July day cast a long shadow. The questions lingered unanswered, like ghosts haunting the streets. Who killed Ken Rex McElroy? Was it a lone gunman or a planned act of vigilante justice? The lack of a trial left a void at the heart of the matter. The people of Skidmore grappled with guilt, suspicion, and unspoken truths. The story of Ken Rex McElroy is a cautionary tale of fear, silence, and unanswered questions. The story of Ken Rex McElroy continues to fascinate and horrify even decades after his death. He has become a figure of morbid curiosity, a cautionary tale whispered in small towns across America. Was he a monster, a heartless tyrant who deserved his fate? Or was he a product of his environment, a man failed by a system that allowed him to operate with impunity for so long? The debate over McElroy's legacy is a microcosm of a larger conversation about justice, about the limits of the law, and about what happens when a community feels abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect it. The events in Skidmore force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, our capacity for both good and evil, for compassion and for cruelty. The fact that no one was ever convicted for McElroy's murder only adds to the enduring mystery of the case. Did the people of Skidmore, pushed to their breaking point, collectively decide to take the law into their own hands? Or did the real killer, shielded by a wall of silence, simply get away with murder? Today, Skidmore, Missouri is a town much like any other. The scars of its past are still visible if you know where to look, but the town has largely moved on. The D&G Tavern, once McElroy's stomping ground, is long gone, replaced by a family-friendly diner. Children play in the streets without fear, and the name Ken Rex McElroy is rarely spoken aloud. But the memory of McElroy's reign and the events that led to his demise continue to shape the town's identity. The case remains a source of fascination for true crime enthusiasts, drawn to the story of the bully who terrorized a town and the community that took justice into its own hands. The story of Ken Rex McElroy serves as a stark reminder that even in the quietest corners of America, darkness can lurk and the quest for justice can take unexpected and unsettling turns. It is a story that continues to resonate today, forcing us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of good and evil, the limits of the law, and the price of silence.